I never thought a single message could change the course of my life. But the night I met her, everything I believed about love and destiny was rewritten. It was late, almost 2 in the morning, in São Paulo. My apartment was silent, except for the hum of my old ceiling fan and the soft glow of my laptop screen. I wasn't looking for anyone. Honestly, I wasn't even looking for love. I was just restless. That's when I opened a language exchange app. I'd downloaded it weeks before, thinking I'd finally learn some Korean after getting obsessed with Korean films. I scrolled without much purpose until I stopped at a profile that caught my eye. Her name was Minji. Her photo wasn't the kind that tries to impress. She was sitting by a window, sunlight on her face, smiling as if she was thinking about something only she could understand. Her bio said, "I love stories that make me cry." Something about that line hit me. So I sent her a message, "What story made you cry recently?" I didn't expect an answer. But minutes later, my phone vibrated. Her reply was short, "The one I'm still living." I remember smiling. There was something about her words, something real. From that night, everything changed. We started talking every day. At first, it was about languages, culture, random things. But soon, it became deeper. We shared secrets, fears, and dreams we'd never told anyone else. She told me about growing up in Seoul, how she used to paint by the river, how she dreamed of writing children's books. I told her about my father's small bakery, the smell of fresh bread at dawn, the chaos of Brazilian mornings. Time zones became meaningless. I'd stay up all night waiting for her messages. She'd wake up early just to hear my voice before work. There was one morning when she said something that made my heart stop. "I wish I could walk with you under the cherry blossoms." And I said, "Then one day, I'll come to you." She laughed. But I wasn't joking. The months passed, and what began as curiosity grew into something far stronger. We video called almost every day. Her laugh was soft, her voice soothing. She'd always cover her mouth when she laughed, a habit she said came from shyness. I started learning Korean seriously. I'd watch dramas and try to repeat words she taught me. Sometimes I'd send her little notes written in clumsy Hangul. She'd correct them with patient smiles. My friends thought I was losing it. "You're falling for someone you've never met in person." I'd shrug and answer, "Maybe. But it feels more real than anything I've had before." I wasn't wrong. After almost a year, we decided to meet. When she said, "If we're serious about this, you should come to Korea," I froze. The idea terrified me, leaving everything I knew for someone I'd never held. But deep down, I knew I would regret it forever if I didn't go. The day I told my mom, she looked at me for a long time, silent. Then she smiled sadly and said, "If your heart tells you to go, go. But promise me, whatever happens, don't lose yourself." I promised. Selling my things, quitting my job, saying goodbye to friends, it all felt like a dream. But at the airport, as I looked out the window before boarding, I whispered, "I'm coming, Minji." The flight from São Paulo to Seoul was long. 14 hours of silence, anticipation, fear, and hope. I stared at the little map on the screen, watching the airplane cross oceans, countries, time zones. Each mile closer felt like a heartbeat. When I finally arrived, it was winter. The air was sharp and cold. The airport smelled of coffee and rain. I walked through the gate, my heart pounding in my chest. And then I saw her. She stood there, holding a small sign that said, "Welcome home." For a second, everything stopped. The crowd disappeared. There was only her. Her eyes were brighter than the photos, her smile trembling slightly as if she couldn't believe it either. I dropped my bag and ran to her. She laughed through tears as I wrapped my arms around her. That was the first time I truly understood what home meant. The first weeks were pure happiness. We walked through Seoul hand in hand, exploring everything. She showed me Gyeongbokgung Palace, where we took photos like tourists, and the Han River, where she told me she used to go when she needed to think. We ate tteokbokki from street stalls, laughed at my terrible Korean, and got lost in little alleys filled with bookstores and flower shops. Everything felt new. Everything felt right. At night, in our tiny apartment, we'd cook together. I'd make Brazilian dishes, she'd try to teach me kimchi recipes. We'd talk until dawn, planning our future. One evening, while we sat on the rooftop, she said softly, "Sometimes I think you're not real." I smiled and said, "I'm more real than ever. You're the reason." She leaned her head on my shoulder, whispering, "Don't ever leave." I promised I wouldn't. But no matter how beautiful the dream, reality always finds a way in. Slowly, things started to change. The language barrier was harder than I expected. Even though I was learning fast, there were moments I felt completely isolated. When she was at work, I'd spend hours alone, unable to communicate with anyone. I missed my family, my culture, the chaos of Brazil. Sometimes, loneliness hit like a wave. One night, I was walking through a crowded street filled with neon lights, people rushing everywhere, laughter echoing in a language I still struggled to understand. I'd never felt so far from everything I knew. When I came home, Minji noticed. "You look sad," she said. "I just feel invisible sometimes." She hugged me. "You're not invisible to me." Her words helped, but the emptiness lingered. Cultural differences started showing up in small ways. I'd make jokes she didn't understand. She'd get quiet when I spoke too passionately, saying it made her uncomfortable. We were from different worlds, different ways of loving, arguing, apologizing. Still, I kept trying. But one night, we fought. I don't even remember what started it. Something about me being too quiet, too distant. She shouted, "You don't talk to me anymore." And I said, "Because I don't know how to say what I feel in your language." Silence followed. Then she left the room. I stayed there, staring at the wall, feeling everything crumble inside me. Hours passed before she came back. Her eyes were swollen. She whispered, "Maybe you'd be happier back home." I wanted to tell her she was my home. But no words came out. Days turned into silence. We barely spoke. She'd leave early, come home late. I'd sit by the window, watching the city lights and wondering if love was enough to bridge the space between two worlds. Then one morning, I woke up to a note on the table. It said, "If we stop trying, we lose everything we fought for." I read it again and again until the letters blurred with my tears. That note changed everything. I realized that love isn't about comfort. It's about effort. It's about choosing someone, even when it's hard. From that day, I made a choice, I wasn't going to give up. I joined a local community of foreigners learning Korean. I practiced every day, sometimes until my throat hurt. I started working part-time teaching Portuguese. Slowly, I began to build a life, not just around her, but for myself. And she noticed. She began smiling again. We started spending evenings together like before, walking by the river, eating hotteok in the cold, talking about everything and nothing. One night, she said, "You're different now." I smiled. Maybe I'm finally finding my place. She touched my hand. "You already had one, here." She pointed to her chest. And for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. The months after that morning were different. Something inside me had shifted. I no longer saw myself as the foreigner who had crossed the world for love. I started seeing myself as a man who was building a new life, one brick at a time, one word of Korean at a time, one moment of courage after another. Minji noticed it. The tension that once filled our home slowly began to fade. Our silences no longer felt heavy, they became comfortable, like quiet understanding. Every evening, I'd walk through the streets of Seoul after work, the air cold and clean, neon lights reflecting off puddles on the pavement. The city no longer scared me. I'd begun to recognize the rhythm of the people, the way life flowed here, fast, yet graceful. And when I came home, she'd be waiting for me with a small smile and 2 cups of tea. Sometimes we wouldn't even talk. We'd just sit together, her head resting on my shoulder, the sound of traffic fading beneath us. And I'd think, this is what love is. Not fireworks. Not perfect words. Just presence. One night, she asked me, "Do you miss home?" I thought about it for a long time before answering. I do. But not the way I used to. I think I found pieces of home here too. She smiled, quietly, and said, "Then maybe we both found home in each other." Her words stayed with me for days. As time passed, we faced more obstacles: visa paperwork, money problems, even disapproving looks from some people who thought our relationship was just a phase. But every time I looked at her, I remembered why I came. I remember one winter night when everything seemed too heavy. Work was stressful, my visa renewal got delayed, and I felt close to breaking. I came home late, exhausted, only to find the apartment dark. When I turned on the lights, I froze. Minji had decorated the place with little candles and fairy lights. On the table, there was a simple dinner, kimchi stew, rice, and a small note that said, "We'll get through this together." I sat down and laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I realized how lucky I was. Even when the world felt impossible, she still believed in us. That night, I held her tighter than ever before. Spring came early that year. The cherry blossoms bloomed faster than anyone expected, covering the city in shades of soft pink. We walked through the park, hand in hand, petals falling around us like snow. I remembered her first message, the one where she said she wished we could walk together under the cherry blossoms. And there we were, living that very dream. She looked up at me and whispered, "You kept your promise." I smiled and said, "You were worth every mile." We kissed under the blossoms, and for the first time, I felt that the universe had finally given me something I didn't have to lose. That summer, I got a permanent job at a local school, teaching Portuguese and English. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me stability and purpose. I began to connect with my students, telling them stories about Brazil, about courage, about how love sometimes means starting over. Minji's art career also began to bloom. She got invited to exhibit her paintings in a small gallery downtown. The first time I saw her work displayed, I cried quietly in the back. Each canvas told a story, our story. She painted us sitting by the Han River, 2 silhouettes against a sky that looked half Brazilian sunset, half Korean dawn. When people asked about it, she'd say, "It's a painting about distance, and what happens when love decides to cross it." That night, I realized something important. We hadn't just survived. We had transformed. But life always finds ways to test your strength again. Months later, Minji got an offer to work in another city, far from Seoul. It was her dream job, teaching art to children at a community center. When she told me, her voice trembled. "It's a small town, about 3 hours away. I don't want to leave you." I smiled, though my heart sank. "You have to go. You've worked too hard for this." She hesitated. "Will we be okay?" I held her hand. "If love survived oceans, it'll survive a few hours." The next few months were hard. We saw each other only on weekends. The apartment felt emptier, quieter. I'd often fall asleep with her voice still echoing in my head from our nightly calls. But instead of feeling sad, I chose to see it differently. Distance wasn't our enemy, it was proof of our strength. Every Friday night, I'd take the train to her city. The moment I'd step off, I'd see her waiting on the platform, waving like it was the first time we'd met. We'd spend the weekend together, cooking, laughing, exploring her new world. And every Sunday, when it was time to go back, she'd hold my hand tightly and whisper, "You're my reason to keep going." I'd smile and answer, "You're my reason to stay." One night, during one of those weekends, we sat by a river near her new apartment. The city lights shimmered on the water. She leaned her head on my shoulder and said softly, "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" I laughed. "All the time. Sometimes I still can't believe it." She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "I think you changed me." I brushed a tear from her cheek. "You changed me too." Then she whispered, "Maybe love isn't about finding someone who completes you. Maybe it's about finding someone who reminds you that you were already whole." I didn't answer. I just kissed her. Years passed like pages in a book we wrote together. We faced challenges, celebrated victories, and built a life that was ours, imperfect but beautiful. Eventually, she returned to Seoul, and we moved into a new apartment near the Han River. It wasn't big, but it was filled with memories, laughter, and the smell of morning coffee. Some days, I'd catch her painting by the window, the sunlight wrapping around her like gold. I'd stop and watch quietly, thinking how surreal it was, that a boy from Brazil and a girl from Korea had found each other in this vast, unpredictable world. My mother visited us a year later. Watching her meet Minji was emotional. They couldn't speak the same language, but somehow they understood each other perfectly. At dinner, my mother took Minji's hand and said in Portuguese, "Thank you for taking care of my son." Minji didn't understand the words, but she smiled with tears in her eyes. Later that night, my mother said to me, "Now I understand why you left. You didn't lose a home, you found a new one." I hugged her tightly and whispered, "I did, Mom. I really did." As time passed, the story of how we met became something we laughed about. Friends would ask, "You really crossed an ocean for love?" And I'd grin and reply, "Yes, and I'd do it again tomorrow." Because the truth is, love wasn't just the reason I left Brazil. It was the reason I learned to stay, to adapt, to grow, to fight. Every challenge became a lesson. Every moment of loneliness became a step toward strength. Sometimes, when I walk through the same airport where we first met, I look around and imagine the version of me who arrived years ago, nervous, hopeful, terrified. I want to tell him, "It won't be easy, but it'll be worth it." Now, years later, I wake up every morning beside her, the sound of the city humming softly through the window. She still laughs the same way, covering her mouth, eyes squinting. Sometimes, she paints while I cook breakfast. Other times, we sit quietly, watching the river flow. Love has become simpler. Not a storm, but a calm sea. Not an explosion, but a heartbeat that never stops. And every time I look at her, I remember why I came. If you ask me today whether I regret leaving everything behind, I'll tell you this. Love doesn't always promise comfort, but it gives you purpose. I crossed an ocean thinking I'd find her, but I found so much more. I found strength I never knew I had. I found peace in a foreign sky. And when I look at her now, smiling in the morning light, I know that love isn't about where you come from. It's about where you're willing to go. And I would cross every ocean again, just to arrive in her arms one more time.